Let's kick things off by getting one of the most obvious ones out of the way. Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One. Ready Player One is essentially one giant pop culture Easter egg. We have to wonder whether or not you can even call it an Easter egg. It's not like these references are hidden. They're all in plain sight everywhere you turn.
Can climb Mount Everest with Batman?
You've got references to Back to the Future, The Iron Giant, and even video games like Halo and Duke Nukem. But there's one sequence in particular where Spielberg goes above and beyond the Call of Duty with his Easter egging. That would be the Shining scene, where the Overlook Hotel is meticulously recreated. This sequence contains so many references to Kubrick's iconic work. You've got the all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy moment, you got the creepy twins, you've even got those dreaded elevators in room 237 with that horrifying old lady. Maybe it's all a bit much. Maybe no one should ever try to recreate a Stanley Kubrick masterpiece, but hey, in case you didn't know already, Spielberg and Kubrick are kind of besties. Does that make it all okay? Maybe not, but it doesn't make it not okay either. Did that make any sense? No idea. Moving on. Show of hands, who out there is a big fan of Robert Zemeckis' 1985 classic Back to the Future? We can't see you, but we're going to go ahead and assume everyone out there is raising their hands. Back to the Future was a major hit when it was first released, going on to gross nearly $400 million on a $20 million budget.
Great Scott!
So yeah, it wasn't much of a surprise when Universal Pictures decided they wanted another one as soon as possible. It would take around 4 years before Back to the Future Part 2 was released.
Great Scott!
Some of Back to the Future Part 2's best moments come from scenes in which Marty McFly has to carefully navigate his way through scenes from previous movies. Zemeckis and his creative team do an excellent job finding ways to make this happen. Take, for instance, the wonderful Johnny B. Good performance, which now features future Marty protecting his past self from Biff and his cronies. It's wonderful, clever, and so very entertaining. Farrell has proven himself to be one of the most hilarious actors on the entire planet. That's right, the entire planet.
You're crazy, man.
But one of his most beloved works has to be 2003's Old School, which was directed by Todd Phillips before he went and got all artsy-fartsy with that whole Joker movie thing.
Can you introduce me as Joker?
So, in Old School, Farrell co-stars with Luke Wilson and Vince Vaughn as a trio of friends looking to relive their college days by starting up a fraternity. What could possibly go wrong? Nothing! It's perfect and no one gets hurt. Isn't that sweet? One particular scene in Old School features a clever nod to another classic. When Farrell's character, Frank the Tank, gets hit with a tranquilizer dart, he ends up causing something of a scene and falling in a pool. Once he's underwater, Simon and Garfunkel's The Sounds of Silence begins to play, a direct reference to Mike Nichols' 1967 classic, The Graduate. The Graduate contains a similar scene where Dustin Hoffman's character Benjamin sits at the bottom of the pool in a scuba suit. Sadly, Farrell did not have a scuba suit on hand, but thankfully, I have a scuba suit on hand. In fact, I'm wearing it as I narrate this video right now. You are welcome. Quentin Tarantino is the kind of filmmaker who wears his influences on his sleeve. He's a movie buff in every sense of the word. Pulp Fiction contains a wealth of film references from His Girl Friday to It's a Wonderful Life. Perhaps one of the most pronounced references comes from the way Tarantino mimics legendary film director Alfred Hitchcock. This is especially noticeable in the scene where Butch spots Marcellus Wallace while waiting at a stoplight. This moment plays out in a near identical fashion to a similar beat in Hitchcock's Psycho. When Marion stops at a crosswalk, she notices her boss passing by. They recognize one another, and she drives away as quickly as possible. Maybe she should have taken a page out of Butch's book and just hit her boss head on. Time travel is a tricky thing, but the Russos and screenwriting duo Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely managed to strike the right tone without robbing the film of its stakes. One of the film's cleverest ideas was taking our heroes back in time through a collection of their greatest hits. They get to relive scenes from the first Avengers, Thor: The Dark World, and Guardians of the Galaxy. It's a page pulled straight from the Back to the Future Part 2 book, and it allows for so many fantastic moments. One of the best moments by far was the scene in which Captain America finds himself in an elevator with all of his undercover Hydra buddies. It's a perfect callback to the glorious elevator scene from Captain America: Winter Soldier.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
The Russos even recreate a number of the same shots from that scene just in case we didn't realize what they were going for. Sadly, Avengers Endgame didn't give us another pulse-pounding elevator fight scene. Still, it was a great reference to one of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's greatest scenes. We know what you're thinking. You're thinking we're going to pull a whole thing like, oh, The Force Awakens is just a beat-for-beat remake of A New Hope, and that's the reason we're including it on this list. And while, yes, The Force Awakens plot certainly does bear a striking resemblance to the first of Star Wars, we're actually going to point out another fun reference in The Force Awakens. It happens during the whole Rathtar sequence. Han Solo and Chewbacca are being chased down the hallway by one of these things. And isn't it interesting that the Rathtar resembles a giant boulder? You might find yourself recalling another iconic movie scene in which Harrison Ford flees from a giant spherical object. Yeah, that's right. How do you like them apples? Bet you didn't pick that reference up, did ya? Oh, you did notice that. Okay, so why did it take me so long to notice it? Am I just completely oblivious or something? And please don't comment below with your answer. But seeing as we're now already on the topic of Raiders of the Lost Ark, let's just keep going down this path and see where it takes us. Hopefully we'll avoid any horrible spiky traps and poison darts and giant rolling boulders in the process. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg weren't trying to hide their influences in the slightest. Their intent to make their favorite serials from the 1930s and 40s are clear from the get-go. One of the more overt references comes from the Charlton Heston film Secret of the Incas. Indiana Jones's outfit is almost identical to Heston's character Harry Steele's. Also, the map scene in which Indy discovers the hidden location of the Ark of the Covenant, very similar to a scene in Secret of the Incas where Steele solves a puzzle in a very similar fashion. The Lord of the Rings has a number of its own influences, but there's one sequence in particular where Jackson seems to consciously emulate another classic. The moment comes in Part 2, The Two Towers. Guided by Gollum, Frodo and Sam scale a rocky cliff face where they get a spectacular view of the Black Gate of Mordor. Fans of The Wizard of Oz might have noticed the similarities between this scene and the moment where Dorothy and her crew scope out the Wicked Witch's castle from a similar vantage point. I mean, even the framing is close to identical. It's not a huge surprise though. Jackson has already made it clear that he is a huge fan of this 1939 classic. Now, if only he'd found a way to include a couple of flying monkeys in his Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Now fly! Fly!
We're sure J.R.R. Tolkien would have loved that. Brian De Palma, the filmmaker behind such classics as Carrie and the first Mission Impossible film, has long made a habit out of visually referencing other films in his works. But perhaps one of the most pronounced references comes in the 1987 film The Untouchables, starring Kevin Costner, Sean Connery, and Robert De Niro. The Union Station shootout sequence stands to this day as one of the greats. It's intense and visually exciting. In the midst of all this, you have Costner's character Elliot Ness trying to catch up with a runaway baby carriage as it rolls down a large staircase. This is undoubtedly a reference to Sergei Eisenstein's film Battleship Potemkin. This black and white silent film features a moment in which a baby carriage stumbles down a flight of stairs amidst a flurry of gunfire. Yeah, so the reference isn't particularly subtle, but hey, it's still pretty great. Finally, we come to Mark Webb's feature debut, 500 Days of Summer. This romantic comedy, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Zooey Deschanel, became something of a cult classic when it was released back in 2009. What's clear about 500 Days of Summer is that its director and screenwriters have an enthusiastic love of classic cinema. Take, for instance, this moment, where Gordon-Levitt's character Tom falls asleep watching foreign films at the local theater. He ends up dreaming that he's playing a game of chess against Cupid on the beach. This is a direct reference to one of Swedish filmmaker Ingmar Bergman's many masterpieces, The Seventh Seal. Only in that film, the main character is playing a chess match against the Grim Reaper, Death himself.